Mr. Bruce Linton. So Canopy has become an amazing success. Tell us about your founding experience. How did you find it? How did it all come about? And why did you even become interested in cannabis to begin with?
So, people, there's this whole global thing going on. Everybody's talking about what's happening now in America and Germany. In 2012, that was not the case.
Right.
In 2012, it was considered very unusual that Canada had already had 11 years of a national, federally approved program for medical cannabis. Most people had no idea. They think that legalization occurred in October 17, 2018. In fact, legalization occurred in 2001. All that happened in October of this past year, almost 1 year ago today, was that the government expanded the basis you could access it, but they didn't make it legal. It was already legal federally.
Right.
And so what captured me was I wasn't particularly knowledgeable of the prior system. I didn't really know anything, but it had grown quite a lot and was causing a lot of problems for police. I said, well, how would that be? Well, if you became a patient, the way you became a patient in Canada was you went to your doctor, and very few doctors would say, yep, you should have cannabis. But if they did, then you had to go to a regulator, FDA equivalent, Health Canada, and they had to sign off, so double system. And then you could grow cannabis yourself. You could get somebody to grow it for you. There was a single supplier that the government acquired later on. And so what had happened is you had about 36,000 people who become medical patients. But if you put a map of the country down and you said, are they equally distributed? Nope. There's a whole bunch of them in a couple of pockets, which also correlated with areas where there was high suspicion of organized crime.
Right.
And so the police couldn't actually identify necessarily who had the right and who had the not right, what was criminal, what wasn't. And so they were very upset, saying we can't enforce the law.
Right.
And so I got involved because at that time we had effectively a Republican prime minister. And if you look at politics at all, in our country, and I think everywhere, if you're a bit more right-wing, you tend to have gray-haired people liking you. And gray-haired people also like police.
Right.
And so if the police are pissed off with your current regulatory state, you will change that so the police aren't pissed off and the people who vote for you will be happy too. And so that was kind of what captured me. And then I guess I just saw it as an opportunity. I don't have a particular, I don't think there's anything like, I'm in favor of people not being greedy, and I'm in favor of people actually being pretty reasonable with each other, no real bias, but I wasn't an advocate for anything. And so when I got in, I was just stepping in. But then when I started encountering all these people with these unfounded bias, I actually became sort of pissed off. And so it made me want to know more, learn more. And then if you decided I don't like cannabis, I was fine with that if it was after we had a conversation.
Right.
Because if you just don't like it, well, I don't like this person because of their background or their color, or I don't like cannabis because I don't. Sounds like a 3-year-old.
Right.
And so I spent the last 6 years in my mind feeling that every time I did an interview, I was speaking to a 74-year-old woman who disliked cannabis but didn't know why.
That's true.
And so my goal was to make sure that if they didn't like it at the end of my conversation, they had to have scientific reason. And really, one of my best lines when I meet somebody, I met a lot of people who really didn't like cannabis. When they'd be very vigorous about why it's so bad, I would say, well, that's interesting. The only reason you could possibly not like the regulation of cannabis is we're not inventing it. You realize it's been on the planet forever. It's everywhere. The only possible reason that you wouldn't like it being regulated is that presumably one of your children or nephews or nieces are criminals. And that you want to defend their right to make a criminal income, because otherwise there's no rational reason not to govern this.
Oh, that's interesting.
And that usually caused them to say, why exactly don't I like this? Because it's everywhere. You can't stop it.
Right, absolutely.
Now the question is, do you just want to, in Canada alone, there's an $8 billion economy that goes unregulated, which means that the resulting products may or may not even be safe or doctored up in ways that you wouldn't want.
So Canada's unregulated too, okay.
Well, Canada, the majority of the sales continue to be illegal.
Wow.
But that will be a cycle in time, because in prior times, the majority of alcohol sales were illegal.
That's true.
And that doesn't stay that way once there's a regulated scheme, because you know what happens is if the government regulates it, they're doing 3 things. They regulate it, give rules. They monetize it, which means tax it, and then they take a portion of it towards education on why you shouldn't use it and how you should use it. If you continue to be an illegal supplier, you're taking the government's money. That doesn't last.
Right. Interesting. So tell me, how did you get involved? I'm assuming when you first started, you mom and pop, small business opportunity?
No, I just kind of looked at it and said, this is not going to be small.
Okay.
Because if you're going to be regulated, that means government inspectors are going to come to your shop.
Right.
And that means, in my analysis, which wasn't really wildly off, to meet their compliance criteria, it meant that you had to have at least probably $2 million of expenses, minimum, overhead, just to keep them happy.
It's expensive being in the business legally, right?
If you know you're going to have $2 million of overheads, minimum for being regulated, that means you have to make a big enough facility that you can grow enough product that all that product will give you way more than $2 million of profit. Otherwise, you can't ever get ahead. And so on that basis, it was my view that you should open a really big place or not do it at all.
Right.
And so the first place that I started was to acquire what used to be the Hershey Chocolate Factory for all of Canada, which is about 500,000 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can imagine at that time it was viewed as a very poor idea. There are no customers really yet. The system's changing.
Single customer or something.
And what you go do is go buy a 500,000 square foot abandoned chocolate factory.
Mm-hmm.
But my thought was that, well, if it works, I need a lot of space. And if it doesn't work, well, it won't be because we started too small. And the way the rules often will work, if you find like good regulation environments won't give Bruce a license, they won't give our company a license, they give an address a license. And the reason is the address can't move, meaning if I took my license from a place you liked and then moved it right beside a school, oh shit. Oh, if I moved my license right beside an old people's home, oh shit. Right. So they don't let you move your license, so which means that if you're building small and you're stuck there, you're screwed.
Oh, that's an interesting
problem.
So
if you stop and think about if you assess your circumstances, you will then make better decisions. And so maybe one of the differences for Canopy is we spend a lot of time constantly thinking about what is the circumstance. And we were chatting, when we were starting this thing up, the circumstance changes all the time. It's kind of like being a driver.
Right.
You have to keep an eye on what's going around you, because it's not that you're going to get in an accident in your car, it's outside.
Right.
And so a year ago, if you went to the MJ Biz thing, they had bags of money and they just took it and threw it at people. Right? And
I witnessed that firsthand.
Now, they don't want to put any money into anything.
Right.
And that will change again in 6 months. But the reality is as these things change, you have to be aware. And so I think Canopy's, some of its advantage arose from constantly assessing the circumstance. Oh, Poland's going to be ready. Let's go to Poland. Germany's good. Let's get on Germany. Let's be the first one to export to Germany from North America, and see what's happening. Because when you do that, you become the incumbent very quickly.
So despite your size, it sounds like you were extremely nimble.
Yeah, I would say we grew from me walking around thinking this is a good idea and nobody else agreed, about 6 years later with 4,500 people in 16 countries. And so part of it is we documented the culture. And people, well, no, I said, listen, I didn't write it down, but we had a very good culture, but we didn't codify it. And so took about 140 different people from all parts of the company all around, and we codified the culture. And so, well, what benefit? So on your first day, we give this to you and say, one of the things said, catch people doing good. Because usually at work you get in trouble. You don't usually get people saying, great job to you, we love this, way to go. Another was get shit done. And then it explained that we will live with whatever we do for a long time, so do it right. But don't be so hesitant to make a decision that we don't do anything today.
Right.
So when you're driving home, you should be able to think in your head, did I have a productive day?
Right.
Was it against the purpose of the company? And if it wasn't, then you got to come back the next day and say, hey guys, time out. And so we really captured make a lot of decisions, and we made, I'm not even joking, I believe we made the most mistakes of any company in the sector.
Really? How so?
Well, because we tried everything first.
Okay.
So like you want to make a beverage that's clear and good, just spend 4 or 5 years trying to invent these things, and you pour a lot of cannabis out. If you're going to be first in everything, your goal is to at least be 51% of the time correct, and eventually you win.
Right.
So that doesn't mean you're correct 100% of the time. It means you're more correct than wrong, but not by a huge margin. So that means you do make 49% of the time potentially mistakes.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, I was actually talking to a craft beer guy, because there's definitely similarities between craft beer and maybe craft cannabis. And, he was talking about how making that clear, crisp ale has taken humans thousands of years. So naturally,
like yeasts and stuff aren't super stable. They don't really, they don't want to work with us all the time. It is amazing to me. Like, I don't know how, like or dislike something like Budweiser. Making the same stuff all the time
with the same consistency, right?
It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cannabis for sure is not there.
And it looks like we're compressing the time, right? We're arriving there quickly.
Well, I think so, and I also think that we're not stopping there.
Right.
So what we think about when you're in your mind's eye, what you were describing as a plant being the same.
Right.
But then the plant has ingredients, and then you have methods you take those ingredients out. And even if the plant wasn't always the same, once you take the ingredients out, there's like 100 plus cannabinoids, the active ingredients. And so if you could set them up in little piles where they're pure,
Right.
it didn't really matter if they were exactly right in the plant, because now you've separated them, and then you go back to them and say, well, I'm going to put some of that with some of this and some of that. And now you can actually measure what you put back together.
Mm-hmm.
And so that starts to go from being a plant to being a process.
Right.
And if you run your processes right, then you can run trials to cause outcomes. And
Right.
you know what people buy? They don't buy ingredients. They buy outcomes.
That's true.
So,
Results.
You know, right now it's waning slightly, but people at least 6 months ago could not help themselves, except for every third sentence had to have the letter CBD in it.
Right.
People don't buy CBD.
Right.
What they want to know is, does this diminish inflammation? Does it help me sleep? Does it cause anxiety to be less?
Right.
And if it does, you say, well, good. How much did you have to take? Did you have to take it all the time? Did you have to take it once? Did you need to take it a couple hours before an event, or did you need to take it instantly in the event?
Right.
Oh, shoot, I don't know. Did you need to inhale or ingest or drink? Was it applied topically? If it was applied topically, how come it got through your skin? Because your skin's supposed to keep all the germs out. And unless you have a cut on your skin, you shouldn't let stuff through your skin.
Right.
So there's a whole bunch of questions that what people actually want to buy is an
Right.
outcome that is repeatable.
So what you're talking about, I think there's definitely a lot of correlation within the pharmaceutical world, right? The pharmaceutical world has done that quite well: dosing, titration, indication, etc.
Toxicity, blah, blah, blah.
Right. There seems to be somewhat of a interesting stigma against pharmaceuticals. I've noticed that there's not a lot of people with that background that are entering cannabis and vice versa. And I've noticed there's a lot of people that are coming in from ag and from cigarette companies and from alcohol companies. Why do you think there's that animosity between pharmaceuticals and potentially the cannabis world?
Well, I think it's just a time horizon thing, right? Suppose a company like Canopy, maybe others, find a way to be very effective at changing long-term care facilities, so where your mom and dad or aunt and uncle are. Those places consume a lot of pharmaceuticals. Like, you got people with anxiety, mobility, pain, appetite. If all of a sudden cannabinoids start to actually push out a whole bunch of those pharmaceuticals, I think what we find is the pharmaceutical people now are in favor of getting in this game, because you're now impacting their income.
Right.
Currently, we're very minimally impacting their income.
Right.
But that's because they have had a longer process to get proof. But it's called clinical trials, and clinical trials are occurring now.
Right.
They're occurring like in Canada.
Right.
And so when they occur, they do a step called reading the data, or reading data. If the data says it's favorable, now you start to impact them. And so I think the main reason for animosity is that it gave the pharmaceutical companies the basis of secure income.
Right.
If that security diminishes, they're going to be in the space.
Interesting. I mean, I know they're eyeing it, right?
Oh, they're all around.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's they are some of the biggest companies on the planet.
Yes.
And so those companies can afford to write a check with an extra zero.
Absolutely.
Versus a booze company, versus, ag. So, like, they don't need to jump in now, because they can afford to come in when they want.
And wait. Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective. How do you think the regular mom and pop can survive the onslaught of pharmaceuticals, big tobacco, big alcohol, really buying up and merging and acquiring a lot of these smaller companies?
Yeah, I think small will be okay. Medium is dead. Big will exist.
Okay.
And the reason is, suppose you in fact like working with the plants, and your goal is to make a living, not to make a publicly listed company, not to, operate in 12 countries. That means your overheads are going to be low. You're not going to have a ton of money spent on accounts for reporting to be public, and you probably don't pay a chief financial officer $500,000 or $750,000. You don't have a huge marketing department. So the mom and pop shops are going to be fine because their overheads are low, but what they have to have is differentiated product. And so that might mean that they have to have some genetics that provide a certain nose or coloration. Maybe they'll make a bespoke finished good. But it's the ones that are the medium size, where all the people working there have jobs rather than actually living and working with the plants. They all get paid a good paycheck.
Right.
And that dynamic in the mid-size, I think, is the biggest risk group. because you're gonna have 2 or 3 really big ones, and they can fit in with this stuff. But I'd be quite cautious if you had a firm with 30 to 130 people.
Oh, that's interesting. And that's a common size, I mean, in a lot of the conferences. So it seems like
that's small enough to get run over and big enough to actually need constant cash flows.
That's an interesting topic. How long were you guys that small? 30 to 130?
Very little.
Really? Okay, so you started large.
Well, no, we started 30 and then maybe 130 or 200. But what happens is if you don't grow at one spot, but you start having 10 locations in Canada and 16 locations around the world, the rate at which you accelerate your growth is significant.
Mm-hmm.
That means you also accelerate the use of cash, which is why you need to go to the big, huge companies and get a lot of cash.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that, then you can continue to go until the big, huge companies say, whoa, 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 you guys are nuts. You're going too fast. You're doing everything at once. How can you do that? I don't know. We're used to it.
How did you develop your insight in really coordinating all of this?
I would say that there are a lot of people who are very good at doing many things, but they need a framework to say what's the purpose, what's the goal, what's the culture. And so I mainly was set the tone and the pace
Mm-hmm.
and let everybody else do everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so in your mind, you should picture someone kind of tapping on a table. If you were doing it the way I was, it was like people just get used to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you set that rather than
Right. And it sounds like you had naturally good instincts with who to collaborate with, what to buy, and
I would say naturally. Part of the thing is people should definitely focus on living and getting older, because the more things you do,
this sounds like a terrible idea. I don't know.
The more you do, the more you learn.
Yeah.
And the diversity of things you do, the more you learn. So like I didn't, I went from tech to infrastructure to this, and I found that when I got to here, I was old enough and comfortable enough just to say, what do I think? And I take inputs. We might have a very good conversation. It might affect what I thought, but I didn't feel any obligation to do what you told me to do.
Right.
So it wasn't, at a certain point in time, you get to the stage where your objective is not to curry favor or have everybody say, well, that's what a good guy. Really like what he does, what he listened to me, did what I said. Nope. Your goal is to figure out what you really think and do it. And if you're wrong, okay. If you're right, okay.
What was your secret sauce, and would you change anything having accomplished what you have accomplished?
I think basically attracting people who understood the purpose and the pace, and really making sure that they were on with it and great. Would I change anything? Yeah, probably. We got a check for $4 billion US dollars, and the culture was so much about that pace moving. They never got around to even making a T-shirt or something as a celebratory event.
Oh, wow.
So, upon reflection, every time you get a check for $4 billion for 17% of your company, you should probably pause and have some kind of nothing.
Yeah.
Didn't make a single pen or not a trinket.
Oh, wow.
And so I probably would, as soon as it came in, we're like, okay, we got to get going now. We got more money. Let's go faster.
Wow.
So, that kind of thing, you reflect and say that might have been appropriate to pause.
Interesting. Well, oftentimes founders have a specific skill set, and when the company becomes a certain size, they may not have the same skill set that the company requires. And I know you obviously had a separation with Canopy. Were you involved in the process?
Yeah.
And
no, and I don't think it was a skill set thing. I actually, I don't think we were even hitting Mach speed, and I certainly didn't feel like...
you didn't even celebrate.
No, but I didn't think there was any question on skill set. I think what happens is as companies get larger, like really larger, the perspective on how they should be run is different than when they're getting large.
Right.
And so I felt like we were just a substantial startup.
Right.
Which meant aggressive experimentation, trying different geographies. But when you get money from big companies don't have a high growth rate, right? They don't have each year they double. Where like in Canopy, the goal was in Q4 typically to do more revenue than we did in the whole prior year. So that's pretty quick growth. But when companies get bigger and they don't grow at the top line, they start to be very profitable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's measured on earnings per share.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're trying to grow really quickly, it's boring, but it's called adjusted EBITDA. It's where you take out anything in the accounting that's not cash.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're a fast growth adjusted EBITDA company, you think, I'm going to build everything I need.
Mm-hmm.
when you're an earnings per share one, you say, how do I lease everything I need so I just have a current period?
Oh, interesting.
If you came to join me, I want to give you stocks so we're all aligned and we work really hard in trying to create something.
Yeah.
But if you're a big company, you just give the bosses at the top some and they tell the workers what to do. When an earnings per share company has a choice to open up a new area which might diminish your margin for a period of time, they don't like that.
Right.
Where adjusted EBIT, it's like, how fast can I get open and be in the market? So
Right.
I would just say that when you get to a big company size and you partner with a big older company, the accounting criteria are totally different.
Right. Do you suggest new founders not to take the money in those situations?
Listen, I've joked about it, but the company was about 6 years old, and I was offered 17% of the company. Here, we'll sell it to you for $4 billion US.
Hard
With
to
a
say.
high probability that you will be fired. You should still do that deal every day, because if you're more, the headline could have as easily read, advancing and accelerating cannabis company goes bankrupt. That's a bad headline. So I would sooner have Linton
Absolutely.
terminated than company dead.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's pick your priority.
Right. But also, how does the company itself really reel from losing a beloved CEO that has built the company and forge ahead?
Well, I think it would have been easier if the next person had sort of been processed. Like, it would have been fine to
Succession planning, right?
Yeah, like a 30-day window where there's nobody in charge, and then but now we're at October 16th. I was out on July 2nd. That's a long time.
So,
and the reason it's a problem is the capital markets don't like a vacuum.
right.
And staff and people that you've joined your team, stress compounds.
Right.
And so I worry about their stress levels, and I'm not totally happy with the fact that my equity is worth about 40% of what it was
Right.
when I was still there.
Right.
So I think those things, when the new person comes in, I bet we'll see a big
Right.
uptick in the stock, a de-stressing of the people, and on you go.
Right. Yeah. I mean, succession planning seems to be a very common procedure that most large companies take on, but perhaps.
We would have eventually, but I think, we tried to have an org chart of people all the way down, but it's very hard at the very top. So, like, you might have somebody runs ops at 2 facilities that if you had to give them a third, you could do that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not the same as saying, well, what's your plan for having a new founder? Well, you can't have a new founder. That doesn't, the question really is it 2 or 3 jobs?
Mm. Interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool. So now you are involved with a lot of exciting new ventures. Tell us about them.
Well, I just try to find enough things to do that I actually get to go. Like, for example, tonight, if I was back in Canada, I was supposed to have a dinner with the ambassador to our country from one of the South American countries that really wants to do a better job on this.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I can do that is both what I did and what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to be involved with enough things that enabled me to have a dinner with an ambassador, or a lunch with a governor, or a coffee at the office of a national regulator in Germany. And this morning I was able to have calls with people in Europe about pet strategies, and calls with the ambassador's assistant who said, "Oh, are you sure you can't meet tonight?" "Yeah, I'm sure I'm in the wrong country." But I like having that visibility and the scope of things to be involved with, because then you actually can see what's going to happen next more than, it's very difficult to read the newspaper and know what's going on.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned South America, and I know you were pretty instrumental in the purchase of Ibu last year. So, plant genetics versus producing it cheap in Colombia, which one wins?
I think they're kind of, nobody wants cannabinoids moving around the planet very easily yet, so you're going to have to produce them wherever you produce them. But the plant genetics one, I think, the plant could do a lot. The plant's kind of like a bioreactor. And so you could tell it, hey, quit producing THC, produce more of this rare cannabinoid, and it probably would. And so I think Ebu's work in that area is quite interesting. I think South America is just a big market. Like, part of what got me into interest of Colombia wasn't just Colombia, it was the fact that it's near Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
Brazil was one of the first places that began to regulate this, and Visa, the regulator, has been up to Canada several times. And, people go, well, why? Brazil's a humongous country. Like, there's a lot of people in Brazil, and there's a lot of middle and wealthy folks that, if you look at GW's product, Sativex, it was available in Brazil before it was available in a lot of their markets. So it was evident that you could actually get in there and succeed. So, like, I would say each country is a market, and genetics can be moved all around, but I'm not sure that the resulting grown product can be moved all around.
Interesting, or at least not yet.
Yeah, not for a long time.
Right. Interesting. So, Canadian companies versus American companies.
Well, right now, Canada is a federal system, so you can use every federal instrument. You can list on large exchanges, like Canopy became the first marijuana company on the New York Stock Exchange. There are no U.S. companies there. You can use credit cards everywhere. We couldn't use cash.
Right.
The credit cards we used were
Cashless
Amex
system.
and Visa and everything like that. When I left, we had bank accounts with like Bank of America. If you're an American company, it's very hard to get there. And so I would say the difference is that when you don't have a federal program, it's very hard to have access to all the federal benefits. You know, how do I do a clinical trial in the U.S.? It's harder than in Canada. It's a federal
Absolutely.
thing. And so I would say it's not necessarily country by country, but it's have you got responsible regulations at the top of your country? And so places like Poland have very good ones. Denmark have very good ones. Germany has pretty good ones. Jamaica has excellent ones. Canada has excellent ones. The U.S. has a patchwork which is inconsistent, and
Right.
that makes it very hard to be a company executing.
Right. And you think that will change after federal legalization?
I don't think there's going to be federal legalization for recreation in America anytime soon.
Interesting.
I think there might be states' rights that enables a state to do what they're doing, and the feds to say whatever the state chose is fine with us. But just say to people, in a lot of the states where they quite dislike cannabis, it's now mandatory. You have to accept it. I could see that being very unpopular federally.
Interesting.
And so I
That's
think
an interesting perspective.
it's a low friction strategy is simply to say, if you like it there in Colorado, good.
Yeah.
We're in favor. But if you don't like it and you're in Alabama, that's fine too. And
If you prefer meth, I mean, meth is your thing. Go for it.
But you know what I mean? Like this isn't something like alcohol where it was around and got taken away and came back.
Right.
This has kind of been almost always taken away. And so it's a very different charge, and for such a long time, it's so politically charged. I think it's very difficult to govern. Now, medical, they could think about doing that.
Right.
I'm not sure that they wouldn't differentiate between medical and rec.
Those are great perspectives.
Yeah.
I know you're interested in a lot of different ventures, and you think that there's a lot of opportunity for growth in a lot of areas within cannabis. What are some areas of growth for those of us that are interested in investing or starting a business or joining a venture?
Well, I think you just have to keep looking at the use. I mentioned, geriatric care. I think most people would prefer to see their parents cared for in an environment that doesn't cause perhaps diminished cognitive function because of the drug-on-drug interaction of all the other drugs they're taking. I think a lot of people really like their dogs. And if it works on a dog, why doesn't it work on a horse? If it works on a horse, does it have any value to pigs? And so you can start to see where you can disrupt all kinds of agro products with this stuff. Cannabis 4.0 is when they started having research that says, can you play with stem cells and cannabinoids and cause tumors to change their size and shape? That's quite a ways out, but getting pretty excited about growing the cannabis might not be the right place anymore.
Interesting.
Now I better get wrapped up soon because I know I got to go to my next fun activity.
All right, fantastic.
It's a never-ending day of fun activity.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for spending so much time and so much great insight. We really appreciate your time. So,
Welcome
thank
to
you.
my patio.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.